In this clip, I'm going to link the underlying methodology of this course to the current moment we are living in now in 2020. And when you look at this image here, which is a drawing by my colleague and co-faculty of ULab, Kelvie Bird, you see a depiction of the current moment in terms of disruption. Right? What it depicts is disruption. And many people say we live not only in a moment of disruption, but really in an age of disruption. And what does disruption really mean? It means that the future is going to be different from the past and from the current moment. So if you depict ourselves here on the left-hand side in the current moment, and now, here, look at the emerging future on the right-hand side, what you can see here on the other side of the abyss. Then the issue is, in an age of disruption, that we know a lot about the current situation. We know a lot less about what the emerging future will be looking like. But what we know least about is this: how to move from here to there. How to sense and actualize emerging future possibility. And that is what this course is about. And the underlying methodology of this course, right, that we refer to with two terms, U methodology or awareness-based systems change, which roughly means the same, is based on the assumption that to do that, to move from here to there, takes a journey that is both an outer journey and an inner journey. Outer journey means kind of reaching out of our own bubble, kind of talking with, connecting to the places where the future is already present now. An inner journey means kind of a journey of opening mind, heart, and will. And when you double click on the methodology here, and look at it from the angle of awareness-based systems change, then you see the summary in this image here. And it's an image that you probably have seen many times, which is the iceberg model that is depicting systems thinking by starting with the basic assumption that underlies all approaches of systems thinking, which is a distinction between symptoms at the top and root issues below the waterline. And in this case, you have three types of root issues that, if you want, summarize the evolution of systems thinking over the past 50 years. Which is, number one, structures, right? Structures that can be broken, and we know a lot about that. Number two, paradigms of thought that are underlying these structures. And then, number three, we have a third category of root issues that we refer to as source, by which I mean source of creativity, source of our own attention and intention, and source of who we are and who we want to be. And if you want to summarize kind of this approach, kind of all four levels together, something that I refer to as awareness-based systems change, you can do it with the following four lines. Number one, you cannot understand a system unless you change it. Famously, Kurt Lewin, the founder of Action Research, and saying that to get to the real knowledge that we need to surface today, we have to engage in this change process ourselves. Number two, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So that one sentence is not only summarizing my past 20 years of experience of a variety of change initiatives, but it's also summarizing many other change makers that I have spoken with and worked with and asked about kind of their experience with change. And what it really means is that in order to lead and accomplish profound change in a system, what it takes is you need to involve all 4 levels. If you just address the first 2 or 3 symptoms, structures, and maybe paradigms of thought, that's good, but it's not good enough. So then the real question here is, if that's true, if we say you cannot understand the system unless you transform consciousness, if that is actually true, then the real question is how? How do we do it? And that's what the third one refers to. You cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. So that's something that we are all familiar with, right? So if I have to go on a personal level, if I have to go through a process of profound change, I of course cannot do it alone. I need a friend, I need a coach, I need someone else who is helping me along this journey. And the same is true for the collective level, just that on the collective level, we lack this infrastructure, right? This infrastructure that helps us to see and sense ourselves. And that's a lot of what the methods and tools kind of in this class will be about, in this course will be about. And lastly, to do all this, to do all these things, we need to be the system, which is something that Ubirasi Patacho, an indigenous leader from Brazil, shared with me recently in the Gaia journey, and which is, of course, echoing something Gandhi and many others have said in other ways before him. If we really want to change the system, we have to embody the change that we would like to see. And that is, of course, at the core of what we are trying to do here. So what's an example of that? And how does that, for example, apply to the world of business, apply to the world of organizational change? And when I think back, and when I started my research here at MIT, and one of the first time I did an interview study with 150 leaders and change makers to really find out some of the deeper dimensions of change and what they have to share. And here's what one of them said. Bill O'Brien, the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, having led a lot of episodes, many episodes of transformational change, he summarized his experience with this line: the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So let me translate. The success of what I do as a change maker depends on the inner place from that I operate. So it not only depends on what I do and how I do it, but the inner place from that I operate, the quality of attention and intention and presence that I bring into a situation. So today, if I would summarize what this inner place is, I would do it like that. It means that we need to stop downloading, stop continuing in habitual ways of operating, in order to access these 3 instruments of inner knowing that every human being has. Sometimes it's dormant, sometimes it's already activated. The open mind, the open heart, and the open will, aka curiosity, compassion, courage. And that's essentially what the U journey is, right? It's to awakening and to cultivate these interior conditions, which then allow us to engage in different relationships, which then generate different results in the real world. And what you see here is a kind of spelling out of these stages and steps. And that's very much what the U process and the ULab journey is about. But let's be real, right? Let's look around what's actually really happening around us, right? And here's what we see. The precise opposite. It's not opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will, but it's a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, aka ignorance, hate, and fear. So that means rather than suspending our judgments and really opening the eyes and seeing, it's kind of projecting and blinding ourselves. Rather than empathizing and sensing, which means looking at a reality through the eyes of another, we are digging in, we are entrenching and desensing ourselves in our various filter bubbles. Rather than letting go of the old and, presencing really means sensing and actualizing the future, we are holding on to the old, and absencing means disconnecting from our highest future possibility. And rather than bringing the new into reality, really birthing something new into being, we here in that cycle of absencing engage in collective patterns of manipulation, violence, destruction, and eventually self-destruction, which we of course see playing out on many levels today. As we all know, right, when you open the first page of your morning paper, what do you see? You see all of this here, amplified. Over the past 4 or 5 years, we have seen a huge amplification of this one. That's the story we all know, but the maybe best kept secret story, right, or hidden story of our current moment is actually that something really profound is also happening on this side of the equation. So the journey of ULAB is really kind of investigating the territory kind of how these two kind of interrelate. And when we now apply this lens to the current moment, right, the moment of 2020 and the moment of not only COVID-19 but also Black Lives Matter, here is what we can see. As a result of this amplification of absencing, we see an enormous amplification of 3 forms of violence: direct violence, structural violence, and attentional violence. Direct violence, like police brutality; structural violence, like shocking levels of inequality; and attentional violence. What I mean with that is not seeing others in terms of who they really are and who they could be. So structural violence is a term that was actually coined by the peace researcher Johan Galtung, he also happened to be my thesis advisor. And I once asked him how he came across developing that term. And he said, when was the moment? And he said the moment was when he was in India, kind of standing on a roof and seeing all the suffering. So you have victims, but you don't have individuals who inflict the violence, right? But it's an economic structure. So that's kind of this term here, kind of structural violence. But the attentional violence actually looks at an even more hidden root issue, which is the way we pay attention to another and whether or not we see someone else in terms of who they really are and in terms of their highest future possibility. And it's not only someone else, but it's also ourselves, because attentional violence can be also applied to oneself, of course. So what are we learning in the Black Lives Matter moment? What are we learning in the current moment of disruption? We are learning that to deal with these issues, we need to learn to address our blind spot. And reflecting on my own participation in these structures, right? I became aware of 3 blind spots that I observed, for example, in my own behavior. The first one is, not seeing, right? It's denial, right? It's the issue of the frozen mind. And it is manifesting in, ignorance and bias. And I would say, even though kind of I knew some things, it's only in the past few weeks and months that I became fully aware of the continuity of how the slave patrols, right, from the early years here in the U.S. directly translated into the lynching practices later and the police brutality today. So the first blind spot being denial or not seeing what's actually going on. I sort of maybe notice the data points, but I'm not making the connections. Number two, desensing, which means not feeling, which is the issue of the frozen heart, or being stuck in your own skin, and which is manifesting and translating into behaviors of othering. So basically cynical behavior, or in some cases even hate. And if I look at myself, I would say, yes, I was aware of massive levels of inequality, for example, between whites and blacks here in the United States. But did I really feel that, right? It was knowing in my head, but it wasn't kind of truly felt. And that's kind of what the second blind spot really is about, desensing, kind of being stuck in your own skin and the inability to look at the situation truly through the eyes and through the experience of someone else. And number three is not acting. It's apathy. So I see something, I even may feel empathy, but I'm still doing nothing. And that's kind of the issue of the frozen will. And that's translating into behaviors of depression or destruction. So what's, the underlying forces here is fear, right, leading into depression, or fanaticism, kind of moving into the opposite end. So that's a little example how this lens of presencing and absencing applied to the current moment really is holding up the mirror, right, to the structures that we collectively enact, that I, for example, kind of as a white male, participate in enacting, and that I need to learn to recognize and then participate kind of in activities to transform these structures around. So coming back to this lens of presencing, absencing, so we see the amplification of this. And of course, what brings us together in ULAB is the intention to strengthen these capacities, right? So that's basically what ULAB does. And you can say in many ways, why is it that we see such an amplification of absencing over the past 4 or 5 years? And the answer is because of two factors. One, we have a lot of disruption that's coming our way. And two, we have a lack of capacity in terms of curiosity, compassion, and courage. And if you are dealing with disruption and you do not have developed these capacities, then life is throwing you into these kinds of behaviors. It's throwing you into that space. So the first thing, what we do to respond to that situation is to strengthening these capacities within ourselves. But talking about systems, we of course know that is not enough. That's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient, because we also need to respond to this situation on a collective level. And that's what I want to close this overview with, because our view on the collective response, the system-wide response, is that what is being called for in this situation is new infrastructures, new societal infrastructures in terms of learning, democracy, and in terms of the economy. So new learning infrastructures basically means whole person, whole systems, learning infrastructures, of which the ULAB is actually an example of, right? Where we not only address the mind, but mind, the head, heart, and hand, and engage them in whole systems change. New democratic infrastructures really means to make democracies more direct, distributed, and dialogic. Something that is at issue in a moment where democracy is at risk in many of our countries and needs to not only be restored, but also advanced and transformed. And new economic infrastructures really deals with the transformation from shifting from an ecosystem economy that is serving the well-being of few to an ecosystem economy that is serving the well-being of all. If we look at that and zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, here's what we see. If we try to accomplish these two things, planetary healing and civilizational renewal, which is what the current situation is really calling for, then what we believe is, what it takes is really that we need to activate generative social fields. And what I mean by that is moving team relationships and stakeholder relationships from transactional to transformative to co-creative. Because that's what the transformation of the economy, that's what advancing our democratic structures and that what our new learning infrastructures all are calling for, kind of co-creative, activate co-creative relationships across organizational and institutional boundaries. And to do all this, we actually need a support infrastructure. And the working title for this support infrastructure is School for Transformation. A school for transformation that is democratizing access to transformation literacy by integrating science, consciousness, new social technologies, so new collaborative technologies, and profound social change, profound social transformation. And that's really what we are working towards, and that's what ULAB is an example of. So the invitation to ULAB really also is an invitation to prototype this new school for transformation that going forward hopefully will help us to democratize access to transformation literacy at the level of scale that is necessary today.